All right. Dr. Briggs, you ready to get started?
Let's get it.
All right, all right. Um, you have so much to share. And I am very, very honored tonight to be here and to have a conversation with you. So, as we're getting started, just tell us a little bit about you and your experiences, as an educator and going through the education continuum.
Absolutely. Well, first off, I want everybody to know I never ever wanted to go into education. I didn't want to, work with kids and that kind of thing. But this amazing woman who I married, she was a second grade teacher in Milwaukee. We moved to Milwaukee after college, and she was working for Milwaukee Academy of Science, and she asked me to volunteer in her class, and I'm kind of like, nah, I'm good. I don't want to come in there. I don't want anything to do with that. But finally I said, I'm going to go in. I'm going to go in this one time, get it done and over with. And so I go in that one time and I'm like, it's done. All right. And about 2 or 3 weeks later, she asked me to come back, and the kids want me to come back in and, be with them. So I'm like, okay, I'll go that second time. And that second time, I'm like, this isn't all that bad. But then after that, she asked me about a month later, that third time. And I kind of asked myself that critical question, why am I working with kids? Now, I had some interesting challenges as a youngster myself in elementary school and then also middle school. So there was this notion that I wanted nothing to do with kids because of my experiences as a youngster in school. But after going in that third time, I really realized that, hey, I need to be working with kids. So I ended up working in the Verona area school district for in a position called a cultural liaison. So that was a position that bridged home life and school life for students in the Verona area school district here in Wisconsin. And I did that for 3 years, and then I wanted to get a teaching license. I didn't have a teaching license, so I ended up reaching out to the Department of Public Instruction and just asking them, what can I do to get a teaching, certification? And they told me that I could go into PE and health because I majored in health science, corporate community fitness with my undergrad. And I ended up getting a PE and health certification and taught PE and health for a few years, and then ended up going into administration, getting my administrative license, and becoming an AP assistant principal at a high school. And then from there, I became an elementary principal, which I'm like, man, I never ever wanted to work with kids that young, but I loved it. It was one of the greatest moves I think I've ever made in connecting with kids and families just in a different way. And here I sit, just as a superintendent, where I just ended up finished, as a superintendent in the school district of Baraboo, here in Wisconsin.
Yeah. Yeah, your story reminds me a lot of stories,
Mhm.
with educators, and how we come in. Some of us come in the traditional route, some of us come in the non-traditional route, but I think at the end of the day, we all still have, and we ended up with that passion for serving,
Mhm.
serving our community, serving our students, serving our parents, serving the teachers in our buildings, and serving the teachers in our district. So, and look at you now, And so I want to go in and talk a little bit about your leadership
Yeah.
and thinking about your leadership philosophy and how that has evolved, throughout your career, in particular working with students that
Mhm.
are that have diverse populations. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I would say my leadership philosophy has evolved into like fully embrace the what I call the love triangle, acceptance, understanding, and appreciation. And if any one of those three things are not present, that framework can't can't exist. It can't stand. And that framework has become like a cornerstone of how I approach, diverse student populations. In terms of acceptance, I've learned that creating environments where students feel genuinely accepted for who they are must precede any academic expectation. If kids don't feel loved, if they don't feel like you care about them or they're accepted or belong in a space, they're not going to care anything about wanting to learn. So my own experiences of isolation, as a youngster versus inclusion taught me that students must feel safe and valued before they can fully engage academically. And regarding understanding, just wanted to break these things down. Regarding understanding, working with diverse populations, it deepened my commitment to the warm demander approach, which is, maintaining that high expectations while providing high support. I've learned that, equity isn't lowering standards, but is rather providing differentiated support for all students, so students can meet those standards that you kind of have for them. And for appreciation, I've increasingly recognized how essential it is to express genuine admiration and gratitude for the unique perspectives and strengths that diverse students and staff bring, right? I mean, a part of who we are as a world and a society is not too many people that I know of are the exact same, right? So being able to, appreciate what people bring to the table, is really unique. And when students and staff feel appreciated, I think they smile more. I think they lean into giving, the same kind of love, towards each other. And just over time, I've increasingly emphasized systems that support the whole child. I think the contrast between my experiences, being excluded, in a room when I was in middle school, and thinking about, what it was like for me when I got to high school, it showed me how environmental factors significantly impact student success.
Yeah. One of the things that really that connected me with you was a very similar belief from the responsive classroom approach, and understanding that just as a human being, we need to feel belonging. We need to have the significance. Even when you talked about just smiling, we want to make
Yeah.
sure we're having fun. We're
Yeah.
enjoying, what we are doing. And so as you begin to think about having and instilling those things, um, what are your most, uh, or what do you believe are the most pressing challenges that are facing educators today?
Oh, that's a great question. I
Yeah.
would say, based on like my experience, I would say first and foremost, funding. I mean, there's like just this funding, the funding inequities remain a critical challenge. Schools serving our students, our most vulnerable populations, often receive insufficient funds. And to meet students' needs, I mean, leaders must advocate at all levels, for equitable funding formulas. If we don't have some fight or some level of understanding around, what those funding formulas need to be, it's going to be hard to maximize the existence of resources through creative, partnerships and grants. So I'd say funding is that like number one thing. And I would say second would be addressing educational equities. Too many students, particularly those from marginalized backgrounds. And I was in a conversation earlier today with someone around marginalization, where some people will tie being marginalized, having that label, to just being a race issue. We have students with disabilities. We have, students, that are part of the LGBTQ plus community. We have students and families who are economically disadvantaged in some ways. So I think it's really important to not, misconstrue that particular, marginalization word to only a particular thing of race. And I still think the experience, that we have in schools are just a place of isolation rather than belonging. Leaders must systemically examine where their systems create barriers, and break those barriers down to build upon what we see as expectations that we want to have for kids and all. So I think those are just a couple of things that I would say. And then I would say one more too is developing authentic student engagement. Um, it's increasingly crucial that we establish that, through student advisory committees. I know for me, I established some student advisory committees, so having students' voices at the table, empowering students to have a voice, is really critical, because not too often people ask kids, what do you think?
Mhm.
What are ideas that you have that can really change our systems, help our schools be different and better? So having the students' perspective at the tables. And then I would say lastly, the staff and student relationships. As a part of my research, my research was based on African American students who attended a predominantly white high school. the factors that impeded and promoted their success. And one of the big factors was student and teacher relationships. And those relationships are really important. As I think about myself and the stories that I demonstrate in my book, the relationships with educators like, Miss Bell Navis. She was a teacher that I had that was amazing. I would say my wife, the relationships that she has with other students and being transformative. Leaders need systems that can prioritize relationship building, particularly those, within those first 6 weeks of school. It's critical.
I You mentioned students with disabilities
Hmm.
as number two. And I want to take that into this new question. This is a great segue for us to talk about your book. Your book is titled Beyond the Label, A Leader's Journey from IEP to EDD. So I
Yeah.
want you to tell me a little bit about that book and what inspired that title, what inspired the content for you to be able to write about that.
Yeah, I want to say one thing. I know some people are here because the book is well, and the book will actually be released on, I think, Tuesday. But I do have a pre-order link that I want to place in the chat for people so that they can have access to that. And with this order, I want people to know that I will personally sign these books and mail them to you based on that order form that they see in the chat so that they have that. So if you want to pre-order the book, you can have that. But to answer your question, I want to go back and ask you to ask that question one more time.
I just want you to just tell us a little bit about your book
Gotcha.
and 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 what inspired you to write this book, and whether it was your personal journey
Yeah.
as well as your professional journey. Just kind of take us through that.
For sure, for sure. I would say that this book, Beyond the Label, chronicles my path from being a student with a IEP to earning my doctorate in education and becoming a superintendent. It's both a memoir and a call to action for educators and leaders. This book explores my experiences in special education, and as I think about the challenges that I faced and been isolated in, room 214, and how transformative relationships with key educators like Miss Bell Navis, and Julie, how they changed my trajectory. I share stories from Somerset Circle. I know there may be some people here from Somerset Circle. That's the hood I grew up in, and we had that concept of a village, right? That it takes a village to raise and to support families and kids. And this book really builds on that in every aspect of it takes a village to change the life and change the trajectory of kids. And beyond my personal story, this book examines how experiences shaped my approach to educational leadership, from implementing restorative practices to different MLSS, the frameworks to creating student advisory committees that give voice to students that are often unheard. Each chapter connects my lived experiences to practical leadership strategies that center equity and inclusion. So my hope is that educators will see it as both an inspiring story and a practical guide for creating environments where all students feel like they belong, and especially those with labels or from marginalized backgrounds, that they know they can thrive.
Yeah. I don't want to give too much of your book away.
Yeah. Hmm.
Because we do want folks to go out there and read it. We want folks to come to the conference and hear you speak and also attend your session, where you would be touching a little bit more in your book. But I do want you to just share, with our audience tonight, just some things that you experienced and what were some of the things that, some challenges you experienced and how you were able to overcome those challenges as a student that had disabilities within your education.
Yeah, I would say one of the most significant challenges was the isolation that I felt in room 214. And I speak to room 214 because I don't think that number will ever go away from me because of the experiences that I kind of had in that room. But it was about when I turned 37, I had asked my mom, and for as far as I can think back, I always wanted to know the answer to this question. I asked my mom, why was I in this room and only came out to go to band and PE? And my mom, turned to me and said, "Well, son, they thought you were mildly retarded." And I don't use that word lightly because I know how that term and that word can hit us differently in education. I know it hits me differently just saying it, but to have my mom share with me when I was 37 that this is what and how individuals kind of saw me as a student, it really caused me to not see myself in the light that I may have thought, in the way that I thought about seeing myself. And when you're separated from the mainstream educational experiences, you begin to internalize a sense that you don't belong. And that was one experience that I had, is that I really felt like I didn't belong in the regular academic settings. That isolation like really creates both academic and social barriers too. Like there was kids who didn't want to hang around with me, or I didn't really care to hang around with, so that's one, significant challenge that I had. Another major challenge was, confronting low expectations. When you have an IEP, some educators, not all, but some educators, immediately lower their expectations for what you can achieve. And I really felt like that was a part of what I experienced. I was fortunate to have people like Miss Bell Navis who saw beyond my label and held me to that high standard while providing the supports I needed. And I overcame these challenges primarily through relationships. I think about one of my coaches, Coach Minard. He was a really structured mentor. I think about my wife Julie, her belief in my academic potential, and the consistent support from my family and community created that foundation that allowed me to develop confidence and resilience in who I wanted to become, or who I needed to become. And I think these relationships gave me the courage to challenge, those limitations, and to see me different, and for me to see myself differently than how others may have saw me.
So before we get into the mentorship,
Yeah.
I do want to go back to 37. You know,
Hmm.
that's a very unique number for you to, have a conversation with your mom and have the reflection. Where were you in your career at that time at 37? And what were you experiencing you know, for you to ask your mom to be bold, to be
Yeah.
curious, about your high school experiences.
Yeah, I was actually serving as a director of elementary, education. And as I would go into schools as that director, I would, like see certain things, kind of happening, for kids. And it kind of reminded me of when I was a youngster, how, you saw some things that kids experience were maybe isolation or conversations about kids. And I remember, going home, and I was over at my mom's one day, and I said, "Mom, I got a question for you. Why was I, in this room and only came out for PE and health?" And what reminded me of that and wanting to ask that question was that I got to see some things that I think had to cause me to have a flashback, or to recreate some of that trauma that I had, that I could not stand for, and seeing happen for kids. So I really wanted to know, for myself. And after that moment of her telling me that, I said, that's a story that I got to tell. Right. And then that's when this book, became a thing for me. So I've been writing this for 10 years, and really getting to this place of really putting it on paper, and really knowing that I'm confident enough now to speak to those challenges because I was going through that space of working with kids, maybe hearing and seeing some things that caused me to reflect on my own experiences that I did not want to see happen for kids. And knowing my story kind of really helped me understand what it could be like to be a student today. Gloria Ladson Billing talks about what it's how you can become culturally proficient, and she talks about getting to know thyself, and then also getting to know at least one other culture, and this kind of reminded me of that when I got to see this happen, but I didn't have all the information for myself about myself. So that's why I really had to ask my mom, like why? Like why did this happen? Because I didn't know, really until I was 37 that was the label. And then when she explained it to me, I was just like, oh my goodness,
Mhm.
this is really helpful.
So it seemed like at this age, you were already, in a leadership capacity. I think you just stated
Mhm.
that you was director of education.
Yep.
And so was this the time where you noticed that your change within your leadership started to take place? Or
Yeah. Yeah, I would say I think I became more of an advocate on a level that I think some people may say I became an advocate more for those things that some people may not have seen as a issue, but caused harm or could have caused harm. So I advocated for things that really made a difference. So, for example, the implementation of our multi-level systems of support, that system is built to make sure that we are being proactive rather than reactive, right? For kids, not that, we don't want kids in special education, because if you need to be in special education is deemed a support for you, not a hindrance for you. So for me, if students really need it, great. But if there's a way to ensure that students are receiving core instruction, with fidelity, that they're showing growth by way of the assessments that we're giving them, and that they are connected to school in a way that's having them feel like they belong in that space and they're not isolated or excluded from things. I think that advocacy for those students and for those families is really important for us to take a stand on, as leaders. And I think that's what really drove me in that space as a director, at that time.
So I want us to talk a little bit about your mentors. And it
Mm,
seems like you had several, not just
yeah,
one.
yeah.
But and we have a little bit of time, so you can talk about, more than one. But I want
Mhm.
you to just share, how and if it was in like like phases where you encounter different people throughout. I want you to, to just share, with our audience tonight about some of those mentors and the impact they had on you as you were going through school and how that molded you also as a leader in
Oh,
education.
all right, cool. Well, you guys have all heard me speak to Miss Belnavis. I think my success wasn't just a solo journey. First off, it was made possible by what I call my village. You heard me talk about that as well. And Miss Belnavis was transformational in how she created immediate connections through home visits and her warm demander teaching approach. Like, she established a climate where I felt valued. So I know if I felt valued, I think all the other kids really felt valued, in that space. I think about Coach Minard, as I really got to high school, he was again a structured mentor, but he created an environment for me to come into a school that I didn't want to go to.
Mhm.
Right. I was coming from eighth grade, getting ready to go to high school. But I think if he never called me to establish this connection of going to high school and being a part of that culture and climate and community, I don't think I would have gone there. So he established and helped me establish this sense of consistency and accountability that helped me develop, my discipline and focus. And I would even go back, or go forward just a few years into that. I think about my wife Julie. Like I didn't even know that there was this connection to college, right? That I could possibly go to college, but like her belief in me academically and my academic potential was crucial. She saw the possibilities in me as we, dated in high school that I could yet that I couldn't see in myself. Her class, I mean, like her classroom environment when I went in to volunteer, like it woke up this passion for learning and education for me. And then, of course, I think about my family. My brother Jackie, is somebody who, a lot of people kind of say, like, how did you make it out the hood? I would say my brother Jackie was a huge part of protecting me. He was a few years older than me, but anytime anything was going down in the hood that I shouldn't have been a part of, or I shouldn't have seen, or whatever, he made me go home. He didn't want me to be a part of that. So like I give a lot of respect and love to him for being that person that really helped me see things differently. My mom, my siblings, and just the whole Somerset Circle and Simpson Street, those two communities, as much as people looked at those communities and saw those communities as being, really dangerous or tough, those communities like defined who I am even still to this day because we saw each other as family. We saw each other as being supportive of each other and helpful. And it established that village concept of who we wanted to be and who we needed to be in representing each other. So, I'm sure there's people that I'm probably missing that I think I do maybe talk about in the book, but just putting people in that group of us being a family and being connected, there was something that everybody brought to the table that like helped me become that person that I am today. And I think about Danny Johnson and I think about Julie Johnson and their impact on who I am. Sam Votaggio, they all played a real big part of who I've become. Mel and Mary Jo, like it's been a huge part of my development of all these people. They're all different, but taking a little bit of each and every one of them to establish who I want to be in life, not only for myself, but I think about my own kids and being a role model to them and a mentor to them. I think about, other people's kids that I, connect with each and every day in education. And not only that, I think about the leaders that I, as a professor that I end up connecting with and all the things that I've learned from all my mentors, being a mentor to a number of people, in education has allowed me and afforded me the opportunity to pay it forward and uplift those kind of going through what could be considered tough times, but at the same time, a privileged time.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. I know we probably have some parents with us tonight, and perhaps some parents that are raising kids that have IEPs.
Hmm.
I'm quite sure we have some educators. I think someone put in the chat they're a paraprofessional working with students. So we have some educators and perhaps some even administrators that are leading schools and districts also on our call. But for the parents who have students or have kids, um, what message, would you like to send, to them of hope, with their students that have a disability?
Yeah. This question really makes me smile because as somebody who has gone through some of the challenges that I've had and not even knowing, earlier on that I was a student, with a disability until my mom really told me, to parents of children with IEPs, I want to emphasize that an IEP is a support, not a limitation. It's a tool to help you and your child succeed. It's not a definition of what they can achieve. So I want to just like really say that again. It's a tool to help you and your child succeed, not a definition of what they can achieve. That's really important. I hope parents take away that relationships matter. Um, I want the teachers and coaches and mentors who see your child's potential can change the trajectory of their life. Be proactive, right? And in finding ways to nurture those conditions and connections. I also want parents to know that consistency and high expectations at home reinforce growth at school, right? Like that consistency and high expectations that you as a parent, you kind of reinforcing that at home with your kid, it will render growth, in school. It will render connections in school. It will render relationships, in school. When I think about Otis, my father, an important figure in my life, he would ask me every day, "What did you learn today?" It established an expectation that learning was valuable and important. The most important, most importantly, as you help your child understand their current circumstances, don't define their future possibilities. The path might look different, but with the right support system, um, there's that village. There is no limit to what they can achieve. So I think that's what I would kind of share with parents.
And with that comment and that response, you have blown up our chat. Kudos. Kudos to you, and I'm glad that your message is being well received, by our audience tonight. And I think we don't um always have the opportunity and platform,
Hmm.
to specifically directly talk to parents, who are experiencing very similar things that our
Hmm.
parents, are experiencing. So, so thank you for being candid, thank you for being honest, thank you for being vulnerable. Thank you for being open, and just, and sharing that, that type of response with the audience we have tonight. I want to shift our focus just a little bit on um, your connection with Center for Responsive Schools
Absolutely.
and um, your response to say yes
Yeah.
to being our keynote speaker for our first 6 weeks of school conference. And I
Yeah.
just want you to just share, why did you accept this invitation? What made you accept our invitation?
Yeah, I have a long standing connection to, I'm going to call it responsive school, a responsive classroom. As a principal of two elementary schools and a director of elementary education in another district, that's been like a staple for the work that I've been a part of, the work that I've worked with teachers on, and I've always seen the Center for Responsive School as this like, man, they're way up here. They're doing really good things. They're impacting schools in a different way. So I really felt like, man, this was a great opportunity to speak to what I believe and what I value. I tell people all the time, you have to know what you stand for, you believe, and you value. And this is one of those things. So when I got the call about this one, I was like, without a doubt, I think Michelle, I think you were on the call when that call kind of happened, and without a doubt, I want to be a part of something that I believe and stand behind, and this is one of those things, and it really spells out what it means to be a educator that believes in relationships, a educator that believes in connections with staff and also students.
Um, the title and the theme of our conference is the first 6 weeks of school.
Hmm.
And I want you to just share, from a leader perspective, how do you see the first 6 weeks of school being that critical time to be able to set the foundation for student success?
Oh, absolutely. I I think it's so. Cool, because the first 6 weeks is probably one of the most crucial point in time of kids, coming into a school and being connected. Because first and foremost, you got to have that trust and safety, right? Students determine if their classroom is emotionally safe before they've fully engaged academically. If they don't feel like they're safe, there's a really good chance you're not getting their full academic potential of engagement. I would also say relationships. You heard me speak to that a second ago. Like the teacher-student bond formed initially becomes the vehicle to, the academic growth throughout the year, right? We want to see kids grow, but I also know that relationships are critical to seeing kids grow. I think you're very rarely going to see kids grow without a positive or some loving relationship connection, to their classroom teachers. And then expectations and routines, those being clear, consistent, having those consistent structures create security for kids, especially for students who may lack stability, at home or in the community. As someone who had a village mindset in the community, there was still, a lack of stability that, I sometimes had when I went to school because it was different than what it was like at home, right? So that lack of stability is those teachers really having clear expectations, having clear sense of security and safety, for kids in that school environment. And then I would say the last thing would be the community identity, the social fabric, of the classroom and what that looks like. Determining if students feel like they belong. If students don't feel like they belong in that space, I guarantee you they won't feel like they're part of that community. So those are the four things that I would say are really critical um, as to why the first 6 weeks are so important to students being a part, staff feeling like they're even a part, and that's a part of us as leaders also. How are we also utilizing these strategies and skills from the first 6 weeks with our staff? Right? We can say students, needed, more or a lot, but I would say our staff need that same 6 weeks, first 6 weeks of school connection that our students do. So we have to lean into that for them too, which makes things more fun and exciting, and people feel like they're a part of, the progression of learning and growth.
And it just goes back to what I was saying earlier about those human behaviors, having that sense of belonging, having that sense of significance, building relationships, building communities, having that sense of connections. These are all, human behaviors, not just so with children and adolescents that we're serving, but also the adults that we have in our schools and in our districts that are serving these kids. So I'm glad that you brought up the adult aspect, because in a responsive classroom course as well as in a Fly 5 course, we are focused on our principals do focus on educating and
Mhm.
providing the adults with the support that they need so they can also be their best and come to school and come to work every day with their best so they can help our students. And so with that, I want you to just bring it back around a little bit more and just share with our audience how your book actually aligns to the first 6 weeks of school.
Yeah, I feel like when I was writing this book, a lot of the things that I had some of and I didn't have much of when I was younger, not even knowing that responsive classroom existed when I was a kid. But there's some people that displayed some of those things, and a part of that you will see in the book are a few things. I would say number one, belonging and community, right? Contrasting experiences of isolation versus belonging demonstrated why community building matters. When you think about morning meeting, like that's really, really important in building that community and feeling like you belong. I think about that teacher student relationship, stories of influential educators that have shown how relationships transcend barriers for me is a connection. Expectations and structures we know is really important for there to be clear systems, supports for all students, and especially marginalized ones who may feel like they don't fit in, or those rules don't apply to me because those aren't the same rules that I agree to, or what have you. But having very clear systems of support for all students and student empowerment, having that personal journey from reluctant student to leader, illustrates, engagement's impact, right? So having that student voice at the table, students being able to give some kind of idea of the expectations and how they can live by those and agree to those expectations. So empowering those students. And then I would say lastly, the equity and inclusion. The real experiences bring urgency to inclusive practices, right? Feeling like, what you need, you're able to get, right? And those things that you aren't feeling like you're getting, that you're not excluded from, right? But that you're a part of it. So when there's a need that you have, making sure that you're included in the aspect of understanding what that need is and why that need is so important to you. So I would say those things really tie not only the first 6 weeks to my book, but it's a great way of living not only within the first 6 weeks, but I would even say beyond the first 6 weeks.
Well, Dr. Briggs, like I opened up and said, it's been an honor. It is an honor to be able to have this conversation with you. And for the audience out there, Dr. Briggs will be our keynote speaker at the First 6 Weeks conference, as well as holding a session, a
Mm.
concurrent session. So just give us just a small little sneak peek. About what you will be, sharing, with our audience as a keynote, as well as what we can expect when we attend your concurrent session.
Well, I think, when you think about, what you'll get a clear understanding of the critical importance of foundational practices for marginalized students. You'll get some real world examples of how trust and belonging impact long-term success. Some of the practical tools for equity focused implementation, and then I would say also some leadership insights for supporting teachers with these practices. I know there will probably be some superintendents maybe in attendance. There may be some building principals in attendance. So I think it'll be really important, not only for them to understand how supportive they have to be of their leaders and teachers, but also the connection of being in those spaces, being where the game is played. So being, in the building so people can kind of see and understand that you understand what it is that they're experiencing, going through, and how they can play a huge role in filling that support. So those are things that I'll definitely lean into heavily.
Yeah. All right. Dr. Briggs, is there anything else you would like to share with us tonight before we go into our Q&A session?
No, other than just thanks to all of you that came out tonight. Again, there's a pre-order for the book link that's been in the chat. Once again, if you do the pre-order, you will get I will personally sign those books and mail them off to you. So you don't have to kind of come hunt me down somewhere else to sign it. You actually get it directly mailed from me and also signed by me with the pre-order.
Mhm. Thank you. And so now we're going to just take some time just to turn it over to the floor. And there are any questions that someone, would like to ask Dr. Briggs, just place it in the chat and Kristen Benson will facilitate it.
Awesome.
Yeah, sounds good. I've been sitting here smiling ear to ear, listening to both of you talk about all the great work that Dr. Briggs has done. And I can't wait to hear him speak at our conference and have you share all the life experiences that have brought you to where you are today. So it's very inspiring.
Yeah. Forward to it.
Yeah, but if anyone has some questions, feel free to drop them in the chat or the Q&A. We're happy to take some questions or lots of comments too. So Dr. Briggs, I hope you go back and read some of the connections that people were making with you with responsive classroom and Yeah, a lot of people were really connecting with the idea that IEPs are supports, not limitations. They're not labels. It's just a tool, right?
Yeah.
Someone has asked, what are things schools and districts do to help Black boys feel welcome in their schools?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Just based on, I'll lean into my research a little bit. From my research, from the perspective of African American males that attend a predominantly white high school, the factors that impede or promote their success, I will say the three top things that staff can do is number one, build relationships. Build relationships. That student staff relationship is really critical. It goes back to students feeling like they're seen. It goes back to feeling like they belong, in that space, but then also allowing them to advocate for themselves, right? And being able to support the advocation that they are bringing to the table. And then lastly, find a way to have, the peer-to-peer connections in a way that's more positive than negative. We do know that regardless of whether things are negative or positive, peers are going to have an impact on their peers. So the best thing we can do as educators is provide those opportunities in the classroom, in within the schoolhouse, that allows students to have positive experiences and wanting to be and do things differently in those spaces. But building those relationships, finding ways to bring their culture into schools. We know that there's not, too many people that are the same, but allowing there to be that sense of who they are in those spaces, as long as it's not causing harm to other people.
And can you speak a little bit also, I'm just going to jump on that question a little bit, about providing mentors and role models in schools and making sure that your staff is representative of the student body? I think that's a challenge for a lot of schools.
Yeah, I think it's a challenge across the country because, right now there is a teacher shortage, right? And it's even more of a shortage of staff of color. We do know that students, regardless of what race they are, if they have one staff member of color, the percentage of them graduating it goes higher, right? So imagine having multiple staff of color. But I don't want to leave it there. I want to be very clear that like the goal is to make sure that every one of our staff members, white, black, green, or yellow, are proficient, culturally proficient in making sure that they're able to serve any kid that's, in front of them. And I think that's really, really important. And I think there are many different tools that are out there. So when I think about, just even responsive classroom, the tools and strategies and resources that exist play a huge part in connection for students and families. Having conversations with families, inviting families into the space to be in the classroom, inviting utilizing some of the resources of organizations, Boys and Girls Club, the Urban Leagues, United Way, Big Brothers Big Sisters, utilizing some of those resources that can also be monumental in students feeling like they are special. I mean, they very are, and that they matter.
Thank you for that. Someone else is asking, how do we continue this valuable DEI work right now? I think we've all had conversations the past few weeks about, what is happening in our country and how can we continue this work? We know it's so important in our schools.
Yeah, I think the only way to not continue DEI work is to stop all school. Don't even have school. Have everybody just go out and play in some fields somewhere. Because no matter who you are, no matter where you work, no matter where you live, we're all different, right? And if we don't think about things through a diverse lens, how are we going? I mean, think about gas. There's usually 3 or 4 different kinds of gas. What they're saying is that there should only be one kind of gas, right? And cars don't, and we have different kind of cars out here that need diesel, they need premium, they need unleaded, right? So just imagine if every car you put unleaded gas in a diesel engine, right? I'm guessing that diesel engine's gonna go kaput at some point, right? So like that's not the mindset that we need to have. I think about equity, right? We're not going to give someone with a broken leg an arm sling and think that that's going to help them, right? So we have to think about this differently because DEI is not one term, right? It's really looking at it through a lens of three different terms. Diversity. You heard me talk about gas. Equity. You just heard me talk about, instead of giving someone with a broken leg a sling, giving them crutches, and somebody with a broken arm, you give them an arm sling. Like, imagine if you did have a broken leg and we gave you an arm sling, right? Just think about that. And then inclusion. Think about how I felt being excluded for all those years in middle school, not being able to come out of my classroom other than to go to band and PE, right? All my buddies are out doing whatever they're doing. And I felt like I didn't belong in that space. I felt like there was no connection for me. Like, this is why DEI is what it is. This is why diversity, equity, and inclusion serves us well, because there's so much that we can do differently with it to support all kids. This isn't about, one group, one race. This is about everybody having what they need to be successful.
Mm. Yeah. We have a question here about what advice would you give new principals or educational leaders who are trying to make a real impact?
I would say, I spoke about this earlier, and I think it's really, really important to know what you stand for, you value, and you believe. Those things are really critical because there's so much coming at us. There's so much coming at us as leaders that may cause us to think about things differently or go in a different direction, or, not stand on what is right. I've seen many people make a decision, do the wrong thing to keep relationships or friendships, right? I'm cut from the cloth. I'd rather not have you as a friend than to do the wrong thing, right? And I think that's important as a leader to kind of keep in mind, and knowing that you have to stand on something, right? My dad used to say, you got to stand for something or you'll fall for anything. And I think that's a really important message for leaders, to really know what you stand for, value, and believe.
Mm. And sort of related to that, someone is asking a question about how you balance life when doing this work can sometimes cause you to feel really overwhelmed.
You cut out there. Can you say that one more time?
Oh, sorry. How do you balance life when doing this work can cause you to feel overwhelmed?
Ooh, that's a really good question.
Yeah.
For me, there's something that I kind of live by, and that I live by is called the 5 steps to happiness. And I want to just bring that up because I want to share what those 5 steps are, because I think that's really important. And those 5 steps of happiness is, you have to own your own happiness, right? You got to be responsible for things that bring happiness to your heart. And you have to challenge your own story. There's many stories out there that people are making up about us, as leaders. But you have to challenge it and change the way you talk about yourself. The way other people may talk about you is going to be their opinion, but you get to write your own story. That's like me tonight. I'm writing my own book to tell about who I am as a person, and not allowing other people to tell that story. And enjoy the journey, not the destination, right? We need to celebrate all along the way, right? The destination, I don't think many of us have ever reached our destination, but we've had some successes. We've had some fun. We've done a lot of things, on our journey to getting to that destination. But we also know that those destinations often move, when certain things happen, or certain places that we want to go. And then, making relationships count. If you don't like you, not many other people gonna like you. So you so you really got to think about, who you are, who you want to be, the types of relationships that you're building with other people, and then balancing work with play, right? You can't do all of either one of those, right? You have to balance work with play. If you're gonna go out and party, well, just know that if you go out and party, there's a lot of stuff over here that still needs to be done, right? And if you're gonna come over here and work all day, there's some things that you need to probably do to take care of yourself, and whether that's exercise, eating right, meditating, whatever it is, you have to be able to balance those things so that you are your very best when you're with staff, when you're with community members, when you're with students. Having that balance is really critical.
You for that advice. Excellent. Excellent. Well, we're just wrapping it up here. I want to thank you so much, Dr. Briggs, for spending time with us tonight. And Michelle, let you
Thank you.
finish it up here.
No, I just, I've already given my kudos to Dr. Briggs. I also want to just say thank you to our audience for listening, to our conversation tonight with Dr. Briggs. And hopefully, we will see you at the first 6 weeks conference. You can also, I know in the beginning you actually chatted, put in the chat where you're from, but please also put your email address so we can continue to stay connected, as that was one of the threads that that Dr. Briggs just continuously talked about tonight: relationships and connection. And that is what we want to be able to do with you and build, at CRS. So I'll give you a couple of minutes to do that, and then we will sign off. Thank you,
Yeah.
Dr.
Thank
Briggs.
you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you all. It was a pleasure. I really do look forward to the keynote, and also, getting out and getting that book out to people, and so that they can kind of see the experiences that I've had in leadership and just as a person in life.
Yeah. And thank you for providing that form for people to get a signed copy. That's very
Absolutely.
generous of you. I know it'll be out in Amazon soon and
Yeah.
in Barnes and Noble, but thank you so much. That's great. Thanks everyone for sticking with us. This was a great chat. I'm just going to leave the webinar open for a minute longer just to let people drop in their email addresses, but thank you so much.